Okay, so today we're going to dive into something a little bit different, maybe even a little controversial.
Oh,
Yeah, we're going to be exploring this idea of men we're tired of hearing about.
interesting.
Our source for this deep dive is a top 10 list from the Top Tens website.
Oh, yeah, I know that site.
Yeah, you know the one where people vote and comment on all sorts of lists?
Yeah, yeah.
And this one is particularly interesting because it gives us a snapshot of who is really dominating our cultural conversations. Like whose stories are we constantly bombarded with?
I see, I see.
So,
And I imagine this
huh.
list probably has a pretty fascinating mix of figures.
Oh, absolutely. We've
Yeah.
got athletes, entertainers, politicians,
Yeah.
even some who have been accused of some pretty serious
Oh,
things.
wow.
It really makes you think about why these particular individuals stick around in our collective consciousness, like what makes them so hard to forget?
I think it's a really good question, and I think it speaks to the power of their stories, but also to our own need to process these events, right? Like these cases raise complex questions about justice, accountability, and how society deals with such serious accusations.
And it's like these figures become almost symbolic, representing larger issues that we continue to grapple with.
Exactly.
Like, even if we think we've heard it all, these cases often tap into these deeper societal anxieties and debates that don't have easy answers.
Right, right, right.
It's like we're trying to make sense of it all, and these figures become these focal points for those
I
conversations.
see, I see.
All right, so speaking of figures who evoke strong reactions, let's look at the top of the list.
Okay.
Right at the top, we see names like Jerry Sandusky and Warren Jeffs.
Oh,
Obviously, their stories are tied to really disturbing allegations and convictions.
right.
But what's intriguing is why they're still being talked about years later.
Yeah, it's a good question.
What makes some figures, particularly infamous ones, linger in the public mind?
Hmm. I don't know. I guess part of it is just the sheer gravity of the accusations, right? Like these were highly publicized cases that really shocked people.
Yeah, and they involve really vulnerable victims, which I think makes it even harder to forget.
Right, exactly.
And then you also have the fact that these cases often raise questions about institutions, right? Like in the case of Jerry Sandusky, it was Penn State University and their handling of the allegations.
That's true.
So it becomes about more than just the individual. It becomes about systems of power and how they can sometimes fail to protect the vulnerable.
Yeah, yeah. And that can really stay with people, like it makes them question who they can trust.
Absolutely. All right, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We've got some big names from the world of sports on this list, too.
Oh, really? Like who?
Well, we got Kobe Bryant, Chris Brown, and Tiger Woods.
Ah, I see.
All incredibly talented,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
but each with their own baggage of controversy.
It's true.
And this is where I think it gets really interesting because the way we perceive these figures is often tied to our own personal experiences, our values, and even the generation we belong to.
Interesting.
For instance, one comment about Kobe Bryant really stood out to me.
What was it?
Someone said, "Look, this guy's been dead for years now. Just let go and carry on."
Wow.
It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if time and maybe even death changes how we view a person's legacy.
That's a really good point, and I think it ties into this idea of nostalgia, right?
Oh, yeah.
Especially with figures who achieved greatness but were also flawed.
Right.
Like, we grapple with reconciling their achievements with their personal failings. And sometimes it feels easier to just focus on the good memories.
Yeah, especially when someone is no longer alive to defend themselves or to try to change their narrative.
True.
It's like their story becomes frozen in time.
Yeah,
Then we've got Chris Brown, who's been in the spotlight for what feels like forever.
it really does feel that way.
Yeah, like I remember listening to him in middle school, and now I'm
Wow.
like 30, and people are still talking about him.
Yeah,
It's kind of wild.
it is.
And someone commented, "I swear he's been famous since I was a toddler, now in 11th grade, and people still care about him."
Wow.
It highlights how differently different generations might perceive a figure like him.
Yeah, because for younger audiences, they might primarily know Chris Brown for his music,
Yeah.
while older generations might have more vivid memories of the controversies associated with his past.
Right, exactly. And it raises questions about how generational differences shape our perceptions of these figures.
It's true.
Like, is it possible to separate the art from the artist?
Mm.
Do our personal experiences and memories influence how much fatigue we feel towards someone?
I think it's all connected.
Yeah.
Like our own personal timelines of when we became aware of these figures and what we associate with them.
Right.
And those timelines can collide. in really interesting ways, especially online where you have people from all different generations and backgrounds interacting.
So fascinating.
It is.
It's like we're all carrying around these mental dossiers on these
Whoa,
figures.
mental dots.
They're constantly being updated with new information, new opinion.
And sometimes those dossiers get so full
So full.
that we just get tired of carrying them around.
Like information overload.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've got court cases, sports stars. Now let's talk about someone who's a whole category in himself.
Okay, who's that?
Kanye West, now known as Ye.
Ah, yes, Kanye.
This guy is a walking example of how talent, influence, and controversy can create this perfect storm of public fatigue.
Oh, he really is. And the source even highlights him as both profoundly influential and undeniably controversial.
It's like you can't deny his impact.
Right.
But at the same time,
Right.
it's like you also can't escape the drama.
And it's constant.
Oh, yeah.
Like he's always doing or saying something that gets people talking.
It's like you can't scroll through Twitter without seeing his name pop up.
It's true.
What's fascinating about Kanye, though, is how he might reflect a larger cultural shift.
Oh, how so?
Well, the lines between public and private life have become increasingly blurred,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
And social media platforms, especially Twitter, they amplify everything.
For sure.
It's like we have access to every thought, every rant, every fleeting moment of these figures' lives.
And it can be overwhelming.
Oh, right.
Like we're bombarded with information about these figures, and at some point, it becomes too much.
It's like we need a break from the constant noise.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the fatigue comes in. It's not necessarily about hating Kanye or disagreeing with everything he says.
Right.
It's more about needing a break from the constant barrage of information and opinions.
It's like needing to step away from the buffet even though there's still food left.
And that's a good analogy. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, I've had enough for now. I
Yes,
need
sir.
to digest what I've already consumed.
Mm.
Okay, so Kanye Age represents this tipping point where even talent and influence can't always overcome that sense of overexposure.
Right.
It makes you wonder, what's the breaking point for people?
That's a big question.
When does admiration turn into exhaustion?
Yeah,
And I think that's something we'll continue to explore as we dive into the rest of this list.
for sure.
Because it's not just about these individuals, right?
Right.
It's about us as consumers and how we choose to engage with their stories in this hyper-connected world.
Exactly.
Like, we have more power than ever before to shape the narratives around these figures and to decide who we give our attention to.
Yeah, and how much attention we give.
You know, it's interesting because we also have some newer names on this list.
Oh, like who?
We've got Travis Scott and Kendrick Lamar.
Okay.
They haven't been in the public eye as long as someone like Kanye,
True.
but they're still generating a lot of buzz,
I see.
both positive and negative.
And that shows that this idea of being tired of hearing about someone isn't just about the length of their career.
Right.
It's about the intensity of their presence and the types of conversations they spark.
Yeah.
Like Travis Scott with the Astroworld tragedy
Yeah.
and Kendrick Lamar with his really introspective and sometimes challenging lyrics.
They both force us to confront difficult topics.
You do.
And sometimes that can be exhausting, even if you respect their work.
That's true.
And then there's the contenders section of the list.
Contenders.
Yeah, the ones who might be on the verge of widespread fatigue.
I see.
We see Alex Jones and Rasmus Paludan,
Aye.
both known for pushing buttons and sparking outrage.
Yeah, for sure.
Is this a different kind of fatigue?
Mm.
One that's more rooted in political and ideological clashes?
You know, I think you're onto something there.
Yeah.
Because when someone consistently espouses views that are deeply polarizing,
Yeah,
it creates a different type of exhaustion.
Right.
It's not just about overexposure.
right.
It's about the emotional toll of constantly encountering viewpoints that you find morally reprehensible or factually baseless.
It's like this constant battle, right?
Yeah,
Having to defend your own values against an onslaught of what you perceive as negativity and intolerance.
it's true. And social media really amplifies that feeling.
Oh, for sure.
Because it's like these voices are constantly in your face.
Yeah, you can't escape them.
It's a reminder that in this digital age,
Yeah.
we're not just passive consumers of information.
We're participants whether we like it or not.
Exactly. And sometimes that participation can be incredibly draining.
Right, so we've got the veterans, the newcomers, the provocateurs.
Hmm.
It's a real mix, but you know what's fascinating?
What?
Despite their differences, they all tap into this idea of legacy.
Oh, yeah.
How will they be remembered? What impact will they leave behind?
That's a great point.
And that's where figures like Donald Trump, Barack Obama, O.J. Simpson, and Michael Jordan come in.
Oh, wow. That's quite a lineup.
Yeah, right? These are individuals whose stories have become deeply embedded in our collective memory.
They really have.
They've transcended being just individuals.
Yeah.
They've become symbols of larger cultural and historical moments.
And I think that's why we keep talking about them.
Right,
Yeah,
because their stories are so intertwined with our own.
exactly.
It's like we're trying to make sense of our own lives and our own place in history through the lens of their experiences.
I see.
And that's a powerful thing.
It is.
But it can also be exhausting,
That's true.
especially when those stories are filled with so much drama and controversy.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's going to be really interesting to delve into these specific legacies and to see how they contribute to this feeling of enough already.
I agree. Let's do it.
Okay, so we're back, and we're going to dig a little deeper into this list of men people are tired of hearing about. We've already talked about how, like, individual actions, controversies, and just the sheer volume of information can contribute to that feeling of fatigue.
Right, right. And we ended on this really intriguing point about legacy. How certain figures become, like, woven into our collective memory, representing something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, it's like their stories become part of our cultural DNA in a way.
Exactly.
So let's unpack that further.
Okay.
Let's start with some figures whose legacies are still being, like, hotly debated to this day.
All right, like who?
Donald Trump and Barack Obama.
Ah, two presidents, two very different approaches, and like two legacies that are constantly being compared and contrasted.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to talk about one without the other.
That's true. And I think Trump's presidency was undeniably tumultuous.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
his supporters see him as a disruptor, someone who challenged the establishment and drained the swamp.
right.
But his critics point to his rhetoric, his policies, and his overall impact on political discourse as deeply damaging.
And it feels like that fatigue around Trump is really tied to the constant division he created. Whether you loved him or hated him, there was always this feeling of being on edge, like waiting for the next controversy to erupt.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was exhausting for a lot of people, regardless of their political stance.
Absolutely. And then you have Obama, whose presidency is often viewed through like a nostalgic lens.
Yeah, especially in contrast to Trump.
Right, like people remember a time when things felt calmer, more hopeful.
But is that nostalgia misplaced? Was Obama's presidency really that much less divisive? And he faced his fair share of criticism, too, especially from the right.
Right, that's a great point. No presidency is without its challenges and controversies.
Right.
I mean, Obama faced opposition to his policies.
Yeah, like the Affordable Care Act.
Exactly, and he was criticized for his handling of certain foreign policy issues.
True.
So it's like this reminder that legacy is constantly being shaped and reshaped, influenced by current events and the political climate.
I see.
It's never really settled.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of figures whose legacies continue to be dissected, let's talk about O.J. Simpson.
Oh, wow.
This is a case that just won't go away even decades later.
The O.J. Simpson trial was a true media spectacle, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It captivated the nation.
Yeah.
And it exposed these deep societal divides around race, class, and the justice system.
It really did.
And it continues to fascinate us.
Yeah, for sure.
Like we see documentaries, books, and even fictionalized accounts of the trial being released all the time.
Yeah, why do you think O.J.'s story continues to hold such a grip on our collective imagination?
I think it's because it touches on issues that are still relevant today,
Like what?
Like we're still grappling with racial inequality, police brutality, and the complexities of the legal system.
Right.
And O.J.'s story, with all its twists and turns, becomes a lens through which we examine these larger societal problems.
I see.
It's like his case became a symbol of a much larger conversation about race and justice in America.
That's interesting.
And it's a conversation that we're still having even today.
That's a good point.
Okay, from the courtroom to the basketball court, let's talk about Michael Jordan.
A legend.
Yeah.
An icon.
And someone whose global brand seems to defy time.
I mean, Michael Jordan is fascinating because he represents the power of athletic achievement to, like, really captivate us.
Absolutely. He was and arguably still is a global icon.
True.
And for a long time, his personal life seemed almost secondary to his on-court dominance.
Yeah.
But in recent years, there's been more scrutiny of his business practices, his gambling, even his leadership style.
Right.
I think that's a reflection of how our relationship with celebrity has evolved.
Oh, how so?
We're no longer content with just the highlight reel,
Yeah.
We want to know the whole story, even the less flattering parts.
We want the behind-the-scenes look.
Exactly.
And social media has definitely played a role in that shift.
Oh, huge role.
Like, we have access to so much more information about these figures, both good and bad.
It's almost impossible to maintain a perfectly polished image anymore.
Right. And I think that contributes to the fatigue we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like we see these figures as more human, more flawed, and perhaps that makes them less aspirational in some way.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about presidents, athletes, even a figure as controversial as O.J. Simpson.
Hmm.
Now let's circle back to the world of music.
Okay.
We already touched on Kanye.
Yep.
But there are a few other names on this list that represent, like, different aspects of fame and fatigue.
Oh, like who?
Lil Wayne and Justin Bieber.
Okay.
Two musicians who rose to fame at very different points in time,
Yeah.
but who both embody that cycle of hype, overexposure, and eventual backlash.
It's like a tale as old as time.
I know, right?
Yeah.
So Lil Wayne, for instance, he was incredibly influential in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah,
His mixtape game was legendary.
for sure.
And he really pushed the boundaries of hip-hop.
Yeah.
But in recent years, his star has faded somewhat.
That's the nature of the music industry, isn't it? Tastes change, new artists emerge, and even the most talented musicians can struggle to stay relevant.
And I think that's where the fatigue comes in. Like, we
Yeah.
might have loved Lil Wayne's music at one point, but maybe we've moved on.
Right.
Or maybe his sound just doesn't resonate with us anymore.
And then you have Justin Bieber, who represents like a different kind of fatigue.
Oh, yeah, how sir?
He rose to fame as a teenager,
Yeah.
and his career has been marked by intense scrutiny and public meltdown.
Oh, yeah. He's almost become a cautionary tale.
A cautionary tale.
Yeah, like the child star who couldn't handle the pressure of fame.
It's hard not to feel some sympathy for him, though, you know?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, he was thrust into the spotlight at such a young age, and he's had to navigate his personal struggles in front of the whole world.
It makes you wonder about the toll that kind of fame takes on a person, especially when it comes so early in life.
It does.
And it also makes you think about how much we as consumers contribute to that pressure.
Hmm.
Like, are we too quick to judge?
Yeah.
Do we hold these young stars to unrealistic standards?
These are important questions to consider.
Yeah.
And they lead us to another fascinating case,
Who's that?
Michael Vick.
Okay.
His story is one of both controversy and redemption,
Yeah.
and it raises questions about forgiveness, second chances, and the lasting impact of our actions.
I mean, Michael Vick's dogfighting conviction was a huge scandal.
It was.
He lost his career, went to prison, faced intense public outrage.
Right.
But he ultimately made a comeback,
He did.
returned to the NFL,
Yeah.
and eventually became a starting quarterback again.
So his story is complex.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Some people believe he genuinely atoned for his crimes and deserved a second chance, while others remain unconvinced, arguing that his actions were too egregious to be forgiven.
It's a reminder that forgiveness isn't always straightforward.
Right.
And it also highlights how our perceptions of these figures can be influenced by our own personal beliefs about justice, morality, second chances.
Exactly.
It's not always black and white.
It rarely is.
And I think that leads us to the final section of this list,
Okay.
where we see a different kind of fatigue emerge.
Oh, what kind?
One that's rooted in ideological clashes and the polarizing nature of certain figures.
I see.
So let's delve into that territory
Right.
next. It's bound to be a thought-provoking conversation.
I'm sure it will be.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this idea of men we're tired of hearing about. And like we promised, we're venturing into some territory that might be a little uncomfortable,
Yeah,
but definitely thought-provoking.
for sure.
So we've talked about how overexposure, controversy, even just like the passage of time
Right?
can contribute to that feeling of fatigue.
Yeah.
But now we're looking at figures who evoke a different kind of exhaustion.
Yeah, what's that?
One that's often tied to like really strong ideological disagreements.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
You know, it's like we touched on this earlier when we were talking about social media amplifying certain voices
Right.
and how that constant barrage of information can be draining even if you completely disagree with those viewpoints.
Yeah, it's like a form of mental fatigue almost.
Totally.
Yeah.
And our list highlights two figures who seem to embody this controversial fatigue perfectly.
Who are they?
Alex Jones and Rasmus Paludan,
Yes.
both known for pushing boundaries and sparking outrage,
Yeah, for sure.
often through deliberately provocative actions and rhetoric.
It's like they thrive on the controversy.
It's true.
Yeah.
So Alex Jones, the king of conspiracy theory.
Oh, he's a piece of work.
I mean, this is the guy who claimed that the Sandy Hook shooting was a hoax,
Yeah, I remember that.
which is just incredibly insensitive and hurtful to the families involved.
Absolutely. And his brand of rhetoric often relies on fear, outrage, and misinformation.
Right.
And for a lot of people, that could be really exhausting to deal with.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not just like disagreeing with someone's opinion.
Right.
It's feeling like you're constantly having to defend basic facts and human decency.
It's like a constant battle against this tide of misinformation, and it can feel like you're never going to win.
It's draining.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then you have Rasmus who's known for his public Quran
Oh,
burnings,
yeah, that's right.
which are obviously incredibly offensive to Muslims.
Absolutely. It's like his actions are deliberately provocative, designed to get a rise out of people and generate attention.
Yeah, and while he might claim that it's about free speech,
Right.
for many it feels like a blatant display of disrespect and a deliberate attempt to incite hatred.
It's like he's trying to provoke a reaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting because with figures like these, the fatigue isn't just about being tired of their antics.
It's deeper than that.
Yeah, it's about the emotional toll it takes to constantly engage with viewpoints that you find morally reprehensible or just plain wrong.
You're right. It's about feeling like your values are constantly being challenged, and it can be incredibly draining to have to constantly defend your beliefs against what you perceive as hate and bigotry.
So the question becomes, why do these figures persist?
Yeah.
Why do they keep pushing the boundaries even when it seems like they're alienating large segments of the population?
Well, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
For some, it might be a genuine belief in their cause, however extreme or misguided it might seem.
Right.
Like, they might see themselves as crusaders fighting against what they perceive as the forces of evil or corruption.
But for others, it seems more calculated, right? Like
Yeah.
they're deliberately trying to provoke outrage as a way to gain notoriety.
Right, to build a following or even to profit from the attention they generate.
Exactly. We live in a world where attention is currency.
It really is.
And even negative attention can be leveraged for personal gain.
It's something to be mindful of as we navigate the information landscape.
Totally. It's a reminder that we have a choice in who we give our attention to.
We do.
And sometimes choosing to disengage from these toxic voices can be a form of self-care.
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember.
Okay, so we've explored a wide range of figures, each representing different facets of fame, controversy, and that feeling of enough already.
We have.
What have we learned?
Well, I think it's important to remember that fatigue is a subjective experience.
Okay.
What might be exhausting for one person could be completely engaging for another.
Right.
It all comes down to our individual values, experiences, and how we choose to interact with the world around us.
You know what's fascinating to me is how all of these figures, despite their differences, ultimately tap into this larger question of legacy.
Oh, yeah.
How will they be remembered? What impact will they leave behind?
That's a great point, and it's something we all grapple with, whether we're in the public eye or not.
Totally.
Like, what mark will we make on the world?
Yeah.
And how will our actions be judged by future generations?
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But that's what these deep dives are all about, right?
Exactly.
Challenging ourselves to think critically about the figures who shape our world.
And the complex dynamics of fame, controversy, and public perception.
Well said.
Thank you.
So, as we conclude this exploration of men we're tired of hearing about,
Yeah.
we leave you with one final question to ponder.
Okay, what's that?
Do you think it's truly possible to be tired of hearing about certain figures, or are their stories so intertwined with larger societal issues that they warrant continued discussion?
That's a tough one.
It is. It's something to think about.
It is. It's been a fascinating journey.
Absolutely.
And we appreciate you diving deep with us.
Yes, thank you so much for listening, everyone.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the world with, open minds and critical thinking.
See you next time.